Now, here in the United States, Donald Trump, just yesterday, he was back in court. And as day nine on the hush money trial, Donald Trump was held in violation of his gag order. Once again, it's the second time that he's actually been sanctioned for violating the gag order. And there's kind of some interesting nuance in this particular ruling because the judge, Juan Merchan, fined Donald Trump, but he said, because he was criticizing expected trial witnesses, so that would be Michael Cohen in particular, that's a big one. Stormy Daniels, that's a big one. He's criticized the makeup of the jury pool. But what Merchan said is that it's specifically related. Like you can talk about the trial, but it's specifically, you cannot keep talking about these expected witnesses. And that's obviously a pretty huge distinction because it addresses the central issue of Donald Trump's argument, which is I have to be able, like this is the middle of a campaign. Mm-hmm. I have to be able to make my case to the public. So you have to let me talk about this trial. I'm running for president of the United States. So Merchan narrowed it and said this is specifically about, talking about. So he said specifically about the key witnesses here, not just about the case in general. And then Donald Trump sat for an interview with Time that was released yesterday that was just full of incredible quotes. Just a lot happening.
When he said he was barred from commenting on the makeup of the jury because it's Trump, I thought he was talking about makeup.
Because he would do that.
He would do that. He's got every year he's got opinions on Fashion Week, but no, apparently he's talking about the jury itself, and you're not supposed to do. That violates the gag order, and so he got a $1,000 fine for each kind of Truth Social tweet he put up. $1,000 for nine posts, and he was made to delete the posts. And the judge said, you could get incarceratory penalties next time.
And he removed the posts, by the way.
He did.
He took them down.
Yeah.
So he removed 7 from Truth Social and 2 from his campaign website, and he owes $9,000. He could, end up with, as you said, Ryan, the consequences could only increase. But the fact that he actually took down all of the posts, it looks like he's throwing in the towel on this particular complaint. And actually, I think it's kind of a fair decision that you can't be going after the key witnesses. You can still talk about the trial, though. I guess that gives him a little roadmap to making his case in the public.
Just be careful there, Mr. President. I would love to get your take on his Time interview, though. Let's highlight a couple of them.
I mean, so if you go on Time's website, and we can put this element up on the screen, they do the thing where they give you the amount of time it'll take to read the article.
83 minutes.
83 minutes, an 83-minute read. He had this it must have been a 2-hour interview, would be my guess, after you account for the editing for clarity and everything that goes into publishing a transcript. And I love when they just publish the transcript, the raw transcript. We pulled a couple of highlights from it. The journalist basically got Trump to touch on everything under the sun. But we can move to this first poll quote because I want to start with the economy because, honestly, we're talking a lot about foreign policy on this show and in the discourse in general for obvious reasons. A lot of American voters are going to be primarily voting on the economy when they go to the polls in November. So this is Trump saying, he's getting asked by the journalist about his 10% tariff on all imports and a 60% tariff on Chinese imports, asked if that's still his plan. And Trump says, quote, "It may be more than that." Brian, I actually thought that was very interesting.
Yeah. And then he said it may be a derivative of that. I don't know what he means by derivative there.
Nobody knows.
Right. And so the reporter presses like, really, it could be more than 10%. He's saying yes, it could be. And then he says it's not actually going to raise prices. It's just going to cost China money, and it's going to put a bunch of money in Chinese coffers. That's nonsense. Like, it's fine to support tariffs.
Yeah.
And I think that tariffs, have a real serious role to play when it comes to building your domestic manufacturing base. Like they're important. But in the immediate term, they're going to cause inflation. Like prices are going to go up. Like that's how tariffs operate.
Well, this created
That's the whole point.
Created a huge debate on Econ Twitter yesterday about the technical definition of inflation because a lot of people were saying Donald Trump is campaigning against inflation, but also campaigning on a tariff. And then economists were like, actually, this is an important distinction. Inflation is not the same as like price increases.
Fine.
And Ryan, you just need to be with precision here. No,
right. No, but they're right.
But it's interesting.
Like, they're true. That's right. From an economic textbook perspective, those are different things. Inflation refers to just when there's kind of more money in the economy. Yeah. I mean, chasing like a smaller number of, or not enough goods. Like that's inflation. But from the perspective of somebody who's going to the store.
Yeah, it's the same. It's the same.
And buying something.
Yes.
They see the price rising, and people don't kind of object to the concept of inflation, but they're okay with price increases. Mm-hmm. Like they don't like when things cost more and when their wages are not keeping up with the cost of things going up. That's something, and in some ways they don't care whether it's greedflation, from corporations,
right? Oh,
rising prices, yeah. Whether it's supply shocks from the pandemic and the reopening of the economy and the ports being all cluttered, or whether it's fiscal policy, monetary policy. Like what people don't like is when they go to the grocery store and it used to cost $50 for a bag and now it's $80 for a bag or whatever. Yeah. That's what they don't like. And so Trump is going to learn that the hard way if he doesn't, figure out a way to come at this in a way that gets prices down.
Yeah, and it's true that, for example, Joe Biden has no control over greedflation. I shouldn't say no control. He doesn't have a lot of control over greedflation. But, unless he but I mean, just even like policy-wise, these are private businesses making terrible decisions as private businesses.
Or making good decisions for themselves.
Making good decisions for themselves. You got to have some money for the buybacks.
But China figures out a way to get corporations to, So it's actually an interesting point. John Kenneth Galbraith included prices in his understanding of the government's role in the economy. Mm-hmm. Like we understand that the government and through the Fed plays a role in inflation, plays a role in unemployment and labor and wages. And we always had understood that the government also played a role in prices. In the 70s, we moved away from that. And we said, well, prices, what can you do? It's just like the weather.
Yeah.
But actually, it is a function of a government and private sector interacting. And so we could actually come in and mess with prices if we wanted to, and I think we should. But anyway, that's a side point.
But it's interesting because, right, the voters are always going to blame, in the same way that Joe Biden is getting a lot of blame for, I think he deserves some of the blame. He spent a ton of money, and that's always behind inflation. But there's also a component of this, even from the right, I agree, that was greedflation. And voters just don't want to hear you scapegoat. They know prices are higher. They don't want you to downplay higher prices, and they don't want you to scapegoat, whether it's China or greedy CEOs. I think Donald Trump is probably better at communicating why he, ascribes some of the blame to China in these cases, but he will learn that lesson nonetheless. He had a pretty good economy during his administration until COVID hit. And what's going to happen if, you have a 10% tariff, he's going to have to confront people who are upset about that. And we saw it kind of happen with farmers and all of that over the course of the administration. And he maintained some, I think, pretty impressive levels of support from farmers. But in a way, yes, it's the Biden lesson can also be the Trump lesson that, when people are paying higher prices, they don't want to hear excuses from the president, even if the president himself is not waving his magic wand or couldn't wave a magic wand and tackle things. One thing also, Brian, my apologies to the control room, I skipped this, but let's put B2 up on the screen because if I were interviewing Donald Trump right now, this is basically the question that I would want the answer to. If a president doesn't get immunity, this is what Trump tells Time about the Supreme Court case that's pending right now. He said, quote, then Biden, I am sure, will be prosecuted for all of his crimes. Trump said that if presidents do get immunity, he went on to say basically, that's great, that Joe Biden will not be prosecuted for his many crimes. But and said that he wouldn't, push for, or implied, basically, argued that he wouldn't push for Joe Biden if presidents have immunity to then be responsible for all of these different allegations, alleged crimes that Joe Biden has been involved with. But I think that's really one of the most important questions is what we see from Donald Trump in the next Trump administration, potentially, if he is elected president. Voters should know exactly how he plans to wield the state. Wield the powers of the state against political opponents, because that's what he's campaigning against right now.
Yeah, how vindictive do you think he will be if he becomes president? Is he going to throw the Justice Department at a bunch of his enemies?
I think it's really hard to say because he likes being liked. And he, in the last administration, was really torn in two different directions, from sort of the hardcore right people and then the neoconservative moderates. And he never really figured that out himself, like which balance worked best. He was intentionally having them fight each other over what his policy should be. So I really have a hard time making a prediction on that. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think he probably will.
He would be?
I think he'll. I think he's so angry about what he's going through now that he feels it's unjust and a witch hunt and election interference and persecution that I think he would. I think he will. I think he'll try. Whether or not the wheels can get rolled through the Justice Department is another question, but I think he'll definitely try.
So we'll put B5 up on the screen here because time got him to respond to questions about the war as well in Israel. I want to know, you said you want to get Israel to wind down the war. You said it needs to get over with. How are you going to make that happen? The reporter asked, would you consider withholding aid? Trump really wouldn't give a clear answer to that question about withholding aid. He said, I think that Israel has done one thing very badly, public relations. No argument there, Ryan. I don't think that the Israel Defense Fund or any other group should be sending out pictures every night of buildings falling down and being bombed with possibly people in those buildings every single night, which is what they do. That's obviously not just a public relations argument, which is why I chuckled a little bit, because he's framing it as a public relations argument, and he's avoiding answering the question about whether he would withhold aid. But that's also, when you're talking about buildings that might have people in them, that's also him criticizing the policy. I don't know what he would do if he was in office. Obviously, he was cozy with Netanyahu, even though he's not been cozy with him, at least rhetorically, in the press now. Again, I think it's very hard to predict what you see come out of a second Trump administration, but at least interesting that the father-in-law of Jared Kushner is talking that way.
It's an interesting way to smuggle in criticism, because it's completely acceptable on the pro-Israel side to say that Israel hasn't been good at its PR.
Right.
Like that's always a fine thing for any kind of ally to criticize their own organization or group of.
PR, right.
Bad PR. You're great, you're doing great, everything you're doing is great. People just don't understand how great you are.
Right.
Like, that's basically what that's saying. But your point is exactly right. He doesn't talk about PR then, he talks about war crimes.
Yeah.
He talks about bombing civilians and flattening buildings. And then he does talk about the PR reaction to that. They then broadcast that. So he's seeing the fact that Israel's broadcasting a lot of its crimes, and whether he's seeing a lot of kind of the IDF soldiers and their TikToks and their reels where they're wearing women's clothing, or where they're blowing up mosques or blowing up schools, or like riding around on children's bikes,
partying on the other side of the wall.
Like all of this stuff is being broadcast. So it is a combination of war crimes that is a fundamental problem of substance, but then also the lack of shame about them and the broadcasting of them to the world. So yeah, and I think one thing that bothers him is that it causes problems for him. Yeah. Now it causes bigger problems for Biden, so he's happy with that at the moment. But I think he's like, in his mind, he's like, guys, he said, just in the same way he said, you got to wrap this up, you got to get this over with. He's like, what are you doing, bombing a building full of civilians and then broadcasting that? Like, that's not going to play well. It's not a moral argument, like you shouldn't do that. It's an argument that this is not going to be effective in your mission of which I'm aligned, with which I'm aligned. And again, that's why I think it's interesting that, like, again, this is the father-in-law of Jared Kushner, and Jared Kushner, and people, Trump gives him credit, actually, in fact, for heading up Middle East Israel policy, basically under Trump's watch, and what they did by moving the embassy and just completely allying the United States with, the goals of the Netanyahu administration, essentially. Not that that's new for United States foreign policy, but it was there was an enthusiasm for that alliance that I think was very specific to the Trump administration. So that's why I find potentially Donald Trump coming into office again, likely based on reporting, bringing Jared Kushner back into the administration. That's, I think, genuinely an interesting contrast. And even casual observers at the time warned that Kushner's approach to the Abraham Accords of pretending that the Palestine question didn't exist and just trying to reach normalization with Saudi and the UAE and Israel and others was not going to work, because Palestinians do exist, and it was going to lead to some type of an explosion. That was the warning. But you can't completely blame the Trump administration for that, because the Biden administration came in January 2021 and had every opportunity to say, whoever let this kid run Middle East policy for the United States was an idiot, and we're not going to continue following that course. Instead, they basically followed the Kushner policy going forward. They did not re-enter the Iran deal. They discarded the Obama approach to the region and adopted the Trump approach. And we wound up with this. Let's do his two-state.
Yeah, let's just
so he was asked about
B6.
potential solutions. I thought this was also kind of a bit insightful from Trump in an interesting way. Do you think an outcome of that war between Israel and Hamas should be a two-state solution between Israelis and Palestinians? Trump says, most people thought it was going to be a two-state solution. I'm not sure a two-state solution anymore is going to work. Everybody was talking about two states, even when I was there. I was saying, what do you like here? Do you like two states? Now people are going back to, it depends where you are. Every day it changes now. If Israel's making, and here's the insightful part,
Yes.
if Israel's making progress,
Yes.
they don't want two states. They want everything.
Right.
And if Israel's not making progress, he goes on, sometimes they talk about two-state solution. Two-state solutions seem to be the idea that people liked most, the policy or the idea that people liked above.
This is like really the benefit of Donald Trump. In some cases, he comes in with no like rhetorical allegiance to either side of a
Doesn't
debate,
care.
and is just like perceptive in the sneakiest ways sometimes, because he like has this like weird business mindset, and he hasn't been reading scripts from full of talking points from like the RNC for 20 years. So he just is like freewheeling, and sometimes it has disastrous consequences. Other times it's weirdly perceptive.
Yeah, when things are going well for Israel, as Trump observes, they just want everything. Why would they agree to two states? It's only when they're on their heels that they say, okay, maybe we'll agree to that.
And the Kushners of the world, again, this is interesting because I'm saying this as somebody broadly on the right. It's frustrating. Any criticism of Israel, you are lumped into this category as like pro-Hamas, pro-anti-Semitism, or enabling anti-Semitism. This is Donald Trump openly criticizing Israel when nobody forced him to. This interview was not particularly tough on him on that question. Like, it pushed him. It was fair. But it wasn't like hostile. It wasn't saying like, you need to criticize Israel right now or you will, sacrifice all of your credibility. It wasn't doing that. He just went there. And I actually think that's really interesting.
And real quickly, and then we can move on to weed, I did want to ask you about, maybe you have some insight into this, the mifepristone question. So he gets asked, do you think women should be able to get the abortion pill mifepristone? And he says, well, I have an opinion on that, but I'm not going to explain. I'm not going to say it yet, but I have pretty strong views on that, and I'll be releasing it probably over the next week.
Yeah.
So this is the abortion pill, which the Supreme Court has said is legal. Do you have any insight? What is he actually going to put something out in a week? Is he just making that up?
I haven't heard anything about that.
Is there any speculation about where he lands on this? Because this is a huge issue. Because if you're in a red state that has banned abortion, but you can still get access to this, it's a game changer.
It's why abortions have increased post-Dobbs, because there's this mass movement towards mifepristone, and it now accounts for a massive proportion of
people are learning
abortions.
about it now, right? Thanks to Dobbs, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I haven't heard any rumblings that he's planning to make an announcement on this, which that doesn't mean he's not planning to make an announcement on it, frankly. If I had to guess where he stands on this personally, I actually still think that could diverge from whatever his policy is, because this interview, similarly, like he wouldn't give an answer on what he would definitively do about military aid, conditioning military aid to Israel. He also would not give an answer about what he would do with abortion.
Right.
And he kept saying, it's up to the states, it's up to the states. Your hypothetical, I won't answer because it's so impossible. You're never gonna have 60 votes in the Senate. So I can't answer your question about whether I would sign a 15-week ban, et cetera, et cetera. On this, I think it's possible he announces a policy really similar to what he announced with abortion in general, that he's just supportive of leaving it up to the states, basically. That upset a lot of people in the anti-abortion movement. But I don't know whether that reflects what he's saying when he says he has a very strong opinion on it, because his very strong opinion could potentially not be reflected by whatever policy he announces. I think he's, privately you hear that he's kind of icked out by anti-abortion people, that he feels like they're weird religious extremists, and, is personally not hardcore anti-abortion. So I would, if I had to guess, I would say he's probably pro-mifepristone personally, but whether that is whatever policy he announces is a completely different question.
Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.
Help us build independent news and get the full show every morning at breakingpoints.com.